Hey guys, today we are talking about air masses and fronts. So go ahead and get down your EQ. Why do fronts cause changes in weather? You guys have probably heard both of these words before if you watch the news and you watch the weather segment. So hopefully by the end of today you'll understand just a little better what they are talking about. So as a review, rising air is what creates weather. So that warm air is going to rise and it's going to cool, condense, and form clouds. Maybe even some precipitation from those clouds. A pressure gradient is what makes wind. So remember, if we have a difference in pressure, if we've got like a high pressure system or a low pressure system and they're interacting, we create wind. We also need to remember that if we have a low pressure system, we're going to have warm and cloudy weather. Whereas if we have a high pressure system, we're going to have cold and clear weather. Cold air is also going to hold less humidity than warm air. So remember that warm air has a high capacity for moisture. So it can hold a lot of humidity if it's warm air. So let's jump right in. What is an air mass? An air mass is a large body of air, all with the same characteristics. So an air mass is just our way of describing a body of air. And we classify air masses by their temperature and their humidity. So how hot or cold is it? How much moisture is there? So how are they formed? Well, it all depends on where they're from. Right? If it's over land, if it forms over land, it's going to be pretty dry, as you would expect, versus if it forms over water, it's going to be more humid. It's also based on location, tropical versus polar. So if it's formed somewhere tropical, it's going to be warmer or hot. If it's formed somewhere polar, it's going to be colder. So let's talk about the names that we use. If your air mass is humid and warm, make sure you're writing this down in your graphic organizer. We call it a maritime tropical air mass. Okay, so MT is the abbreviation. It's humid and warm, and this is the kind that forms over the Gulf of Mexico, right? It's formed over water and it's tropical. Our next type is going to be dry and warm. So if it's dry, that means it forms over land, so we call it continental. And if it's warm, it's going to be tropical. So this is the kind that forms over places like Texas. Maritime tropical is, you can see it right over there, forming over the Gulf of Mexico, versus if we have a continental tropical, it's probably going to form somewhere over like Texas or Mexico. There's some more types of air masses. So we have a humid and cold one. We call this one the MP, or the maritime polar. If you notice, maritime means that we're talking about something that forms over the ocean. So if you see maritime, think about forming over the ocean. But this one we see a lot of times over the Atlantic or Pacific Ocean. So lots of water, but it's not super warm. It's not tropical. Dry and cold is going to be forming over a land mass, so it's going to be continental, and it's cold, so it's going to be polar. So CP is a continental polar air mass. We see this one a lot of times over Canada. So think about colder regions forming there. And then we also have an A air mass, which would be Arctic, meaning northern Canada. And this one is super cold. So there you can see on the map we've got our maritime polar is off to the sides in the northern region. Notice that side region would be ocean, so it's formed over the ocean with cold air. We've got continental polar, would be a northern air mass formed over land, and then that Arctic is way up north. It's going to be very cold. So what I want you guys to do is look on your note sheet and see if you can fill in the abbreviations for each air mass. So see if you can fill out MP or CP or A or MT or CT in those bubbles to see where they go. So I wanted to show you guys the visual. It wasn't working on my iPad, but this would be a continental polar air mass. You can kind of see how it moves. And we call it a continental polar because it forms over land, right? And it's also talking about cold air. So it's up north in a colder area where it forms. We also have this one over here is a maritime tropical. So this one is going to form over the ocean in a very warm area, right? So it's going to be warm and humid, and that's one right there that we would consider a maritime tropical. All right, if you guys would flip over your graphic organizer, we are going to talk about fronts now. So if you notice, there are 4 columns and 4 rows. For each type of front, you're going to be filling in the name of the front, what happens during that front, what weather we get because of that, and you're going to want to draw the symbol as well. But somewhere at the top of your paper, just off to the side, I want you to write what a front is. So make sure you know that a front is the boundary between air masses with different characteristics. So basically, if you have 2 different air masses and they come together, that is a front, okay? And a front is where we get weather changes from. So first off, in your first box, we're going to put cold front. And what happens is cold air pushes out the warm air. So fronts are always named by the air mass that's moving. So in this case, that cold air is going to move in and push out the warm air. This kind of front usually gives us heavy precipitation and thunderstorms. All right, and it's usually in a pretty localized area. And we're going to represent it with a blue line with triangles on it. So if you see that blue line, that means cold front. That means expect heavy rain and thunderstorms. So this is what it might look like. You've got that cold air moving in on the warm air. It's going to cause the warm air to rise, and you're going to get heavy rain. The faster that cold air moves and the faster that warm air rises, the more rain we'll get. Next is a warm front. So this is where the warm air is moving and it's forcing the cold air out. Here we're going to get clouds and precipitation over a large area. This one's symbol is a line with some semicircles, and it's going to be red. If you think about a stove burner, when it gets hot, it turns red. So if we have a warm front, it's going to be red. And here's a picture of that. We've got the warm air approaching that cold air, and it's going to cause the cold air to, it reacting with the cold air is going to make the warm air rise, and we're going to get some condensation, some clouds, and some rain over a wide area. Next is a stationary front. So that should be your 3rd row down. This is when 2 similar air masses come together. And 2 things can happen here. We can either get widespread clouds and a slight drizzle, or it can be beautiful, clear weather. And we're going to represent this one with, it's kind of like a mix between the cold air, or the cold front and the warm front symbol. So we've got a line with semicircles and triangles. And these, when you've got 2 similar air masses coming together, they kind of balance each other out. So it's a pretty mild weather pattern. It's not going to be anything too drastic. And the last front we're going to talk about is an occluded front. This is when we have 2 colds sandwiching a warm front. So think about an Oreo. The cookies would be the cold front, and the cream would be the warm front. So that's going to, when those 2 cold fronts are surrounding that warm front, it's going to make that warm air rise really quickly. Okay, it's going to force that warm air up into the sky really fast. It's going to condense, turn into clouds, and then our weather pattern we get is downpours. So the faster that warm air rises, the more rain we get. So if you see a purple line with purple triangles and purple half circles or semicircles, that means we're going to get a downpour. And that's what that looks like there. So we've got both the cold airs are moving. They're sandwiching a warm air pocket in the middle, and that air is going to go up quickly, condense, and fall back down as a downpour. So just some key points from that, guys. Fronts are named by the air mass that's moving. So if it's cold air moving, it's cold front. If it's warm air moving, it's warm front. Also, they cause air to move. So air is going to rise and it makes clouds and weather. So without fronts, we would not have weather. And then another key point is just the faster that air rises, the more precipitation we're going to get. So if we've got something like an occluded front with a lot of cold air pushing that warm air up really quickly, you get lots and lots of rain. And there's our symbols. So that first one, remember, is a cold front. The second one would be a warm front. The third one, see if you can guess what it is an occluded front. And then the last one, the fourth one, is a stationary front.